NBC's Ali Vitale is here with me in studio, and also with us, the senior writer for The Dispatch, David Drucker. So, Monica, let's start with you. The president and his team, obviously, they have a busy day today. You actually have some new reporting on a Biden campaign call, also a memo that went out today. What can you tell us about the president's meeting today?
Well, Ryan, there have been so many questions about how, in the days since that disastrous debate performance, the president would manage that and who he would be speaking to and how that would trickle down to the White House staff and to the campaign staffers. And we are hoping to get some indication about that message in these two calls that are going to be held later this afternoon. One with White House staffers, where I'm told that the chief of staff, Jeff Zients, is going to deliver a message that he really told to the senior staff, which is about 40 people in the White House making some of the most critical decisions day to day, which is to weather the storm and keep your heads down and keep your eye on executing the mission of this administration. But we understand that there are, of course, younger staffers who have had questions about the president's potential vulnerability here, his path forward, and so they want to hear that from the chief of staff themselves. In terms of the Biden campaign, they are also going to be having a call with senior leadership today, and they did send out some guidance to their entire staff in Wilmington to brace for some polling later today that could be rather difficult for them to digest, that could show a real shift potentially in the race here. But they're trying to insist, according to this email that we obtained and that I saw, that if you look at the New York Times polling, which is one that could come out today, they don't expect there to be something so seismic like what many private Democrats are saying. That's what they're watching for to make a decision about whether to speak out more publicly. So they're waiting on that, but they're trying to say that their own internal polling, which we don't have as much of a window into the methodology on, that shows that the race is still tight, according to the Biden campaign. And so they're trying to extend and amplify that message as well. So you're seeing that across the board from the White House to Delaware at headquarters, that the mission continues to keep doing your work. And that is sort of what young people are waiting to hear a little bit more from, as the most senior aides are still really saying here, Ryan, that the president wants to stay in this race, that he's full steam ahead. But as we know, the external pressure is what's really growing here. And that's why that meeting with Democratic governors later today at the White House could also prove critical.
And we know the president also spoke at a fundraiser last night, kind of offered somewhat of an explanation for his debate performance. What did he say?
He did, for the first time, speaking without teleprompters at an event like this since the debate, acknowledge that he had a poor night, that he blamed his foreign travels in the weeks before the debate. Remember, he was in France, he was in Italy, and he says that really he didn't listen to his staff, who maybe had said, well, that's a lot, that's a jam-packed June ahead of the debate. But we should also know and point out that he went straight from Italy to Los Angeles for a mega fundraiser with George Clooney and former President Obama, and then returned to the White House with more than 10 days of pad between that and the actual debate in Atlanta. And that is why he spent 6 days at Camp David, a couple extra days in Rehoboth, trying to lead up to that and start to prepare for that. So there was ample time, but it was really notable, Ryan, that the president sort of apologized for his performance and did say that in part he felt that poor delivery was because he, quote, almost fell asleep on stage. Ryan.
Ali, let's turn to you now, because we obviously have Congressman Lloyd Doggett, who's the first Democrat calling on Biden to end his reelection bid. But, you know, I've been talking to a lot of these Democrats on the Hill. I wonder if they hear what Monica has to say about the reaction from the White House as a degree of tone deafness as to the reality of the situation here. I mean, what are Democrats telling you?
I think that's the sense that I have. I'm sure it's the sense that you get from your sources as well. This idea that they feel like the White House is still not treating this as seriously as they need to, that the outreach has not been as robust as they would need it to be in order for them to continue to go out and say, we support this president, and of course draw the contrast that we know they all want to be drawing with former President Trump. There is a serious amount of mistrust happening within the party right now, but where all of these bad feelings go is sort of anyone's guess at this point. Yes, you have a handful of lawmakers on the Democratic side in the House coming out and saying they think that Biden needs to go, or kind of softening it slightly by saying he's going to lose, which I think is a horse of a different of the same color. But whether or not they're willing to put their names on it, whether or not they're willing to sign on to some letter drafts that are circulating around the Hill but might not have critical mass to send, that's going to be the thing that we're waiting for. If this dam is going to break, I think many lawmakers would prefer it to happen now as opposed to when they come back to the Hill next week with things unresolved. But there is so much unresolved, and there's so much misery and bad feeling right now. It's all over our text messages.
Yeah, the anxiety is palpable. And it's interesting, the president and Senator Schumer, at least as far as we know, have not spoke. We do know that Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, and the president spoke last night as we talk about this lack of outreach between the White House and the House Democratic Caucus. What do we think could come from that?
Well, look, the fact that they spoke, I think, is important and notable. We don't have much detail on what was discussed in that call, but we probably can guess pretty well the calls that Hakeem Jeffries is getting from members of his own conference. And they are telling him how negatively they feel about both the debate performance and, of course, this last week almost of fallout. There's no plans for a caucus-wide phone call at this point. I think that's telling, in large part because that would be a really messy phone call. But we know the way that Hakeem Jeffries, as leader, has handled these moments, and I think this is probably the most tumultuous before, which is he lets his members air their grievances. My understanding is he's letting them be where they are right now in terms of feeling angry and mistrustful. But whether or not he comes in and says, all right, time to all pull us up by our bootstraps and get behind the president again, I think a lot of that really hinges on this Stephanopoulos interview that the president is going to be doing and how it plays in the days after. But also, again, the outreach that has not sufficiently been done, according to the sources I've talked to, from the White House to the Hill to say, this is the explanation and let's get back in line.
Yeah, okay. So let's get the view from the other side. David, what are Republicans in Washington saying? It's notable how almost quiet Donald Trump has been about all of this. Do Republicans want Biden to stay in the race?
Of course they want Biden to stay in the race. He looks extremely vulnerable. Look, Ryan, he was losing the race before the debate. The whole reason he wanted this early debate was to reset the race, put himself on a stronger footing heading into the summer and fall, and he failed miserably at doing so. And Republicans now feel like Biden is the best candidate they could face for Donald Trump, not just to win the election, but to have a much larger victory than anybody might have imagined. I think one of the issues the president is dealing with is we haven't really seen him since Thursday. No interviews, very little outreach from him personally. And so the campaign in the White House seemed to be functioning as though everything is just fine, and everything is not fine. And that's one of the reasons why we've started to see leaks in the dam with Democrats starting to discuss the idea that he can't win even if he stays in the race. I want him to get out of the race. The president needs to make the case himself aggressively, something he hasn't done. He needs to do multiple interviews and press conferences, something he hasn't done. In other words, he has to give voters a different visual than the one they have from Thursday. The fact that he hasn't done so is inexplicable, but it's leading many Democrats to believe that he isn't doing it because he can't, because things won't look any different. And of course, Republicans are, as silent as they are, gleefully saying, yeah, we told you so, and we don't think anything's happening. We think nothing's happening, excuse me, because we don't believe he's capable. That adds to their sense that they hope and pray he remains in the race because they believe that he is the easiest for them to beat.
And we have got reporting now that President Obama has offered a more pointed critique behind closed doors. He put out a post on X shortly after the debate offering his support of President Biden. There's so much Democratic hand-wringing behind closed doors, David. Do they need to start saying these things publicly in order to at least move this process along?
Well, there are two different schools of thought. One is you let the president come to this decision on his own because he's prideful. All presidents have egos, and if he feels cornered, he's going to resist. On the other hand, I do think it's important for the president and those closest to him to understand where this race is now versus last week. Again, they're hanging their hat, Ryan, on this idea that nothing much has changed in the polling. Number one, that's not true, and it could only get worse. But number two, he was losing. He was losing nationally for about 9 months. He was losing worse in the battleground states for about 9 months. Yes, it's close, or it was close, but when you're losing, still losing isn't the answer. And I think the more Democrats feel threatened, the more they're going to speak up.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.